They told me it was just a harmless gardening club, but the first note I found buried in my tulips told me the truth. Every smile, every meeting, every flower was a lie, and I was the target. May 10th, 2022 began like any other Tuesday in Nashville, Tennessee. The sunlight draped the garden in a warm, deceptive glow, brushing against the tulips I had meticulously planted that weekend. I was kneeling in the moist soil, arranging the blooms, when my fingers brushed a small folded note tucked between the stems. At first I thought it was a scrap Julia had dropped, a reminder, a trivial list, but the words burned into me. We know your every move, pay or face consequences. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I dropped the trowel, heart thudding, and glanced toward the kitchen. Julia appeared, carrying a steaming mug of coffee, her smile too sharp, her hum too deliberate. "Oh, that?" she said. "Some stationery from the club. They've started leaving little reminders." But her tone didn't fit the weight of the words. My gut twisted. I opened the note again and noticed a receipt peeking from its fold. $2,500 paid to the Gardening Club of Nashville on May 5th. Julia hadn't mentioned it. That sum for a hobby club didn't make sense. I memorized the date, tucked the note and receipt into my pocket, and began observing with care. Julia's gestures at meetings were rehearsed. She lingered with certain women longer than needed, exchanged glances that were just a fraction too knowing. I noted early arrivals, vanishing members, unexplained bank withdrawals, all logged in my ledger, dates, faces, transactions, times. Each anomaly tightened the knot in my chest. By evening, my unease had grown. Another note slipped under the door read, "We see you, keep your eyes open." Julia poured wine, smiling as if nothing had happened. Fun? Threat? I didn't know yet. But the balance of our life, our finances, and my son's safety felt suddenly fragile. The garage code had been reset. The front door locks changed. Someone was quietly testing boundaries. I photographed the notes, the receipt, the impressions in the soil, every detail a piece of the puzzle I vowed to solve. Late that night, footsteps crunched on gravel. The garden gate clicked softly. A shadow lingered near the tulips, just beyond the porch light. Leaves rustled. A distant dog barked. The ordinary night had transformed into a symphony of threat. Sitting on the porch, note and receipt in hand, I traced the crease with a trembling finger. Fear tangled with resolve. If they thought I'd crumble silently, they were wrong. Every whispered glance, every lurking figure, every $2,500 payment would be accounted for. Not with vengeance, but with law, patience, and undeniable proof. By moonlight, the plan had begun to take shape. This garden, my sanctuary, was no longer just soil and flowers. It was the front line, and I intended to win. May 15th, 2022. The morning light filtered through the blinds, but I barely noticed it. My mind was spinning, haunted by the notes from the tulips just days ago. I sat at the kitchen table, a stack of fresh envelopes in front of me. Each one bore the same chilling message: "We are watching. Pay or consequences will follow." My hands shook as I flipped the first envelope open. The paper crinkled under my fingers. A $2,500 payment slip fell out, identical to the first one. I realized then that the club's so-called dues were just the tip of a calculated iceberg. I checked the bank. My eyes widened. Another $3,200 had disappeared from our joint account. I traced the withdrawals to accounts I didn't recognize. My pulse thumped in my ears. I tried to focus on Julia, who sat across the table, pretending to sip her coffee calmly. Her indifference was infuriating, almost cruel. Every smile she gave now felt like a calculated mask, a test to see how I would react. I spent hours photographing every letter, every receipt, and noting inconsistencies. The club's meetings weren't as innocent as they claimed. Faces shifted in photos, glances lingered too long. Early departures, late arrivals, they all hinted at a pattern, a carefully orchestrated surveillance of my life. Each anomaly I logged meticulously in my ledger: date, time, face, location, transaction. Sister Anna stopped by that evening, her keen eyes scanning the room. "Something's wrong," she said softly, sitting beside me. She didn't need me to explain. Her presence was grounding, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I felt a flicker of gratitude amidst the tension. Outside, a storm began to roll in. The wind rattled the shutters. Rain tapped insistently against the windows. A shadow moved along the fence, vanishing just as quickly as it appeared. I froze, heart hammering. Fear was now a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Yet beneath it, resolve grew. I couldn't confront Julia yet, not without proof, but I could prepare. By nightfall, I had created a small arsenal of evidence. Each letter, each withdrawal, each suspicious face became another stitch in the fabric of my strategy. Julia's charm was no match for documented facts. Every calculated threat, every subtle intimidation, was feeding the ledger that would eventually speak louder than anyone's words. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, connecting dots, tracing movements, imagining the upcoming confrontations. Each thunderclap made me flinch, but also steeled my resolve. I realized that patience, observation, and meticulous documentation were now my only weapons, and I intended to wield them with precision. By midnight, the stack of letters, receipts, and notes was organized on the desk. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. The gardening club was no longer a hobby. It was a calculated operation designed to intimidate, manipulate, and extract money, and I would not be its next victim. I made a silent vow: every act of deception would be exposed, every threat would be neutralized, and every wrong would be documented for justice. May 20th, 2022. The air in Nashville was thick with humidity, and the scent of blooming magnolias mixed with the faint tang of morning rain. I had reached a turning point. The letters, the receipts, the suspicious withdrawals all pointed to a pattern too deliberate to ignore. It was time to take action beyond observation. I hired Tom, a private investigator I had researched thoroughly. Deadpan humor, meticulous, legally astute, exactly what I needed. His first assignment was simple: observe publicly accessible areas without trespassing, note faces, vehicles, and behaviors linked to the gardening club. He arrived early that morning, briefcase in hand, and immediately began reviewing the photos and documents I had already compiled. Within hours, patterns emerged. Club members met at the same cafe every Wednesday morning, exchanging briefcases, whispering in corners, and slipping notes into handbags. Cars with tinted windows parked near my driveway, lingered, and left again without explanation. Julia's stories of casual weekend gatherings didn't align with timestamps, receipts, or surveillance photos. I logged everything in my continuity ledger: dates, times, amounts, faces, license plates. That evening, I cross-referenced Julia's account of the May 10th club meeting with receipts and photos Tom provided. She had claimed to be at a charity luncheon, but her signature appeared on the cafe's membership ledger that very morning. Every lie, every deviation strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just tracking money anymore. I was mapping the deception, the network designed to intimidate me. My focus sharpened. I began anticipating their routines, predicting arrivals and departures, noting subtle signals: a nod, a glance, a sudden withdrawal from a table. Each piece of data was a thread, and I began weaving them into a clear picture. My ledger became a blueprint for understanding not only Julia's role, but the entire club's operations. Late that night, a familiar car appeared across the street, unfamiliar to me, engine idling. My heart raced, but I held my position. Notebook open, documenting the plate, the model, the driver's posture. Fear still lingered, but calculation had taken its place. I realized that patience and careful observation were now my weapons. Every shadow, every whispered conversation was a clue toward reclaiming control. The evidence was mounting: letters, receipts, public meeting photos, and now verifiable surveillance of suspicious behavior. I could see the outlines of a plan forming, not one born from rage, but from methodical strategy. I would isolate the conspirators, reclaim my family's safety, and expose deception with facts, not conjecture. By midnight, I reviewed the ledger one last time. The picture was clear. Julia's charm and the club's secrecy had no immunity against meticulous observation. The pieces were in place. Every move, every transaction, Every whispered threat was accounted for. I felt a grim satisfaction. The puzzle was almost complete, and the next steps would take me from observer to actor. May 22nd, 28, 22. Nashville's mornings were crisp, the sun cutting through the haze with a deceptive calm, while I felt the tension coil tighter with every hour. I had enough evidence now to act strategically, but this wasn't about vengeance. It was about lawful exposure, reclaiming control without breaking the law. I filed formal complaints for trespassing and harassment, carefully detailing every incident: the reset garage code, the unexpected shadowy visits, the anonymous notes. I kept copies of each complaint stamped and logged by the county office. The letters, receipts, and bank slips were organized meticulously, ready to support any future legal action. With Tom's guidance, I began attending select club meetings, legally, public spaces, photographic documentation, observations, all above board. Julia's composure faltered under scrutiny. A subtle tremor in her smile, a hesitation in her handshake, slight changes in her tone, details I recorded silently in my ledger. Every meeting revealed more coded conversations, fleeting glances, behavior that hinted at coordinated surveillance of my household. Receipts collected by Tom showed consistent discrepancies: funds diverted for club events that never materialized, payments that aligned suspiciously with the threatening letters. I cross-referenced each transaction against meeting times, faces photographed at public events, and Julia's stated whereabouts. The web of deception was no longer invisible. It was tangible, documented, undeniable. Each evening I reviewed the ledger with precision. Audio cues from my own home, a creak on the stairs, the rustle of leaves outside, the hum of the refrigerator, reminded me how carefully I had to operate. Even a small misstep could alert them. The stakes were high: my finances, my reputation, my son's sense of safety. Every move had to be deliberate. A minor incident heightened the urgency. One club member lingered near my property longer than legally permissible. Tom captured the encounter discreetly from public vantage points. I filed a supplemental complaint citing the exact time and duration. I watched Julia's reactions carefully, noting the slight panic in her eyes when I mentioned filing the report. She realized the anonymity of the club was dissolving, that our world was no longer governed by her hidden rules. By May 28th, the evidence stack was substantial: letters, bank slips, public photographs, receipts, and documented complaints. Julia's small smiles were forced, her demeanor guarded. The club members were cautious, aware that their secrets were being logged in meticulous detail. I felt a surge of control, tempered by restraint. Each lawful step I took, each observation documented, was a stitch in the fabric of eventual justice. As night fell, I locked the ledger in the drawer, the weight of weeks of planning pressing against me. I could feel the shift. Julia's carefully constructed facade was cracking. The stage was set. All that remained was to continue gathering proof, preparing for the moment when every deception, every threat, every false smile would be exposed under the undeniable authority of law and fact. June 1st, 2022. The first hints of summer had begun to heat Nashville, but I was far from feeling warmth. My focus was sharp, my mind calculating each move like a chess master plotting several turns ahead. The gardening club's subtle manipulations, the anonymous threats, and Julia's increasingly forced smiles had built up to a crescendo I was ready to confront, but carefully, lawfully, strategically. That morning I intercepted a new demand slipped under my door: $1,200 by noon, or consequences escalate. My pulse raced, but I didn't panic. The money was already earmarked, flagged in our bank as suspicious. I called my financial advisor, froze the relevant accounts with official approval, and noted each transaction. Every dollar taken illegally or under duress was now traceable, documented, and untouchable. Tom had confirmed the club's routines. Their schedules, movements, even the timing of these notes were predictable when cross-referenced with my ledger and his surveillance footage. I reviewed the photos of Julia at the cafe, the faces of other club members laughing in public, their casual charm hiding something far darker. Each piece of evidence aligned perfectly with my observations and calculations. That afternoon, I confronted Julia. She was arranging flowers in the living room, pretending normalcy. I slid the receipt and time-stamped photo across the table. I know exactly where you were, what you did, and who was with you, I said calmly. Her eyes widened, a brief flicker of panic overtaking the practiced mask of serenity. The $2,500 payments, the suspicious withdrawals, the anonymous notes, it was all documented. Every move traceable, undeniable. The club members realized anonymity was gone. Their whispered meetings, subtle glances, and quiet intimidation were now captured in photographs, receipts, and ledgers. I could almost hear the shift, the sound of control slipping from their hands. In public they were poised. In private, nervous, aware that the meticulous documentation would follow them wherever they went. By evening the ledger was heavier, more complete. The financial anomalies, once a source of anxiety, were now instruments of leverage. Fear had shifted. I wasn't just defending my assets anymore, I was reclaiming them. The balance of power, once subtly manipulated against me, now tipped firmly in my favor. As I closed the ledger for the night, the evidence stacked neatly on the desk. I felt an unusual calm, patience, observation, and lawful action had brought me here. Julia's silent recognition, the subtle tension among the club members, the frozen bank accounts, they were all reminders that every thorn they had planted would now be carefully uprooted and documented. The game had changed, and I was leading. June 2nd, 2022. The days crawled slowly, each one heavier with anticipation. The courtroom date loomed, and I could feel the subtle shift in the air around our home. Julia tried to maintain her composure, but small cracks betrayed her. Hesitations, a fleeting panic when a note arrived, or when I casually mentioned a new ledger entry. My focus was singular. Document everything, remain patient, and prepare every piece of evidence meticulously. The letters, receipts, surveillance photos, bank records, they were all cataloged, cross-referenced, and backed up. Each page in the ledger was a small triumph, a quiet warning that the veil of secrecy was lifting. My son noticed the tension too. Subtle anxiety lingered in the corners of the house, though I shielded him as best I could. Evenings were the hardest. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in the garden heightened my alertness. The locks clicked with deliberate care, doors double-checked, gates secured. The house itself had become a silent witness to the unspoken battle. I continued monitoring Julia's routines legally. Public errands, social gatherings, and club events were all opportunities to gather admissible evidence. Tom provided time-stamped photos of arrivals, departures, and meetings. Small details, like the exact time she signed receipts or the subtle gestures exchanged with club members, became critical pieces in the unfolding puzzle. Each night, I reviewed my ledger, notes shuffled, letters cataloged, surveillance footage logged. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, wind rustling the tulips outside, the distant bark of a dog, but amidst the ordinary suburban sounds, tension thrummed. The silent countdown to exposure and accountability was relentless, inescapable and intoxicating in its inevitability. Julia attempted subtle manipulations, sending messages to unsettle me, adjusting her schedule to appear casual. I documented it all. Every feigned smile, every forced comment, every attempt to manipulate perception was now verifiable. The club members were aware that every action was under scrutiny, their anonymity dissolving with each passing day. By June 14th, my ledger was complete, my evidence airtight, and my resolve unshakable. Letters, bank withdrawals, receipts, surveillance photos, and time-stamped logs all pointed to a single truth. The deception orchestrated by Julia and the club would not go unchallenged. I had become patient, methodical, and immovable. The silent countdown had ended, not with panic, but with preparation. The stage was set, the final confrontation imminent, and every thorn they had planted was about to be exposed. June 15th, 2022. The morning air in Nashville was crisp, almost deceptively calm. I drove past familiar streets, every turn and lamppost a silent witness to weeks of meticulous planning. Today was the day. The courthouse loomed ahead, a granite edifice that had never felt so imposing, yet so necessary. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the ledger securely tucked under my arm, a tangible weight of weeks of labor and patience. As I entered the courtroom, The polished wood and muted lighting made every sound echo: footsteps, whispers, the rustle of papers. Julia was already seated, the gardening club members flanking her like silent sentinels. They had spent months projecting calm, charm, and innocence, but I could see the tension in their posture, the subtle rigidity of their hands. They knew the veil of anonymity was gone. Lawyer Marcus, with his dramatic courtroom flair, greeted me with a curt nod. He had reviewed every piece of evidence: the letters, the receipts, the surveillance photos, the time-stamped logs, the documented bank withdrawals. Each item had been cross-referenced and legally verified. This wasn't conjecture, it was irrefutable. The proceedings began. Marcus stood, voice firm, unwavering. "Your Honor, the evidence before you today demonstrates a coordinated effort by the gardening club, led in part by Julia last name, to intimidate, manipulate, and extort the plaintiff." He gestured toward me, calm and resolute. I presented the first piece. The $2,500 receipt dated May 5th, cross-referenced with photos of Julia at a public club meeting. Each letter, each note was displayed chronologically. The notes read aloud: "We know your every move. Pay or face consequences." A faint murmur rippled through the courtroom. Julia's eyes widened, a brief flicker of panic, quickly masked by her rehearsed composure. Next came the surveillance photos Tom had captured in public areas. Faces, cars, times, all meticulously catalogued. I had been careful: no laws were broken, no privacy invaded beyond what was publicly observable. Each photo painted the picture of a coordinated operation, a silent observation of my household, my routines, and my finances. Marcus presented the bank documents. Suspicious withdrawals, totaling $32,500, traced to accounts associated with club members. Each transaction aligned perfectly with the threatening notes and documented club events. The judge, reading through the organized exhibits, paused occasionally, flipping pages with deliberate attention. I could feel the weight of every detail, every documented anomaly bearing down with quiet authority. Julia attempted subtle glances at club members, perhaps seeking reassurance, perhaps calculating a new narrative, but it was futile. The evidence was irrefutable. Receipts, letters, photos, and logs all converged to a single truth: deception, manipulation, and intimidation orchestrated to extract money and control. As Marcus concluded, I watched Julia's composure finally crack, a slight tremor in her voice, a fleeting misstep in posture. The club members shifted uncomfortably. The courtroom's air was tense, heavy with anticipation. Each whisper of lawyers, rustle of paper, and footstep magnified. The gavel struck. Silence. In that moment, I realized that patience and meticulous observation had transformed fear into control. Each micro-strategy, every documented note, every verified transaction had led here. The judge's voice echoed, acknowledging the veracity of the evidence. Julia's silent recognition of exposure was palpable. The club members' anonymity dissolved entirely. I sat back, heart steady, ledger open before me. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration, protection, and moral closure. Each thorn they had planted, every subtle attempt at intimidation, had been recorded, observed, and lawfully neutralized. The courtroom had become the stage where truth, patience, and lawful strategy triumphed. When the proceedings concluded, I walked past Julia, the club members, and the courtroom doors with calm certainty. The ledger remained a testament, not just to the deception, but to the deliberate, lawful pursuit of justice. Every step I had taken, every observation had led to this reckoning, and in that silence, the first true peace in weeks settled over me. June 16th, 2022. The courthouse doors had closed behind me, but their echoes still hummed faintly in my mind. Julia had moved out, the gardening club disbanded, and our finances, once manipulated and threatened, were gradually restored. The house, once tense and oppressive, now carried a quiet, cautious calm, as if it too had been holding its breath during the storm of deceit. I walked through the garden, now a symbol of regained control. Tulips swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze, their petals catching sunlight and dancing with shadows from the surrounding trees. I paused to brush a hand over the blooms, remembering how each note and receipt once felt like a hidden thorn among them. Every flower now felt like a small victory, proof that patience, meticulous documentation, and lawful strategy had transformed fear into empowerment. Friends and neighbors offered quiet congratulations. They didn't ask for details. They didn't need them. The calm in their eyes mirrored the relief I felt inside. My gratitude extended to Tom and Marcus, whose dedication had made each documented detail legally irrefutable. Together we had transformed a campaign of manipulation and intimidation into a tapestry of evidence, patience, and moral clarity. Inside the house, subtle shifts marked the change. Locks reset, codes secure, accounts reconciled. Even the garden gate, once a silent sentinel of fear, now symbolized boundaries firmly restored. I spent evenings reviewing the ledger, not out of obsession, but to reinforce that every moment, every subtle threat, and every act of deception had been accounted for. The pages detailed letters, receipts, photographs, timestamps, an archive of survival and strategy. My son played freely among the tulips, blissfully unaware of the intricacies that had shielded him. His laughter, echoing between the flower beds, carried a sense of safety I had fought to restore. Watching him, I understood the most profound victory wasn't financial or social. It was the preservation of family, the restoration of trust, and the knowledge that the sanctuary of our home was intact. Evenings in the garden became moments of quiet reflection. I traced the pathways I had once patrolled with vigilance, remembering every small anomaly, every suspicious movement, every fleeting glance from Julia or club members. Those memories now fueled understanding rather than fear. Each observed misstep, each note, each bank transaction had become a lesson in patience, strategy, and ethical action. By the final days of June, the garden and the home felt alive, not with tension, but with a quiet sense of renewal. Every document, every ledger entry, every carefully catalogued receipt was more than a record of deceit. It was a shield, a blueprint of resilience, and a testament to the power of deliberate, lawful action. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained etched in every corner of the house, in every flower, and in the vigilant smile I allowed myself to wear. The tulips swayed in the warm evening air, reflecting the calm that had replaced tension, and I realized that the pieces I had picked up were more than just evidence. They were fragments of restored life, autonomy, and peace. Each step forward was deliberate, measured, and imbued with the knowledge that vigilance and patience had finally yielded the justice I had long awaited. July 2022. The summer heat pressed gently against Nashville, but inside the courthouse and my home, a cooler sense of clarity had settled. Julia faced the consequences of her manipulations, and the gardening club members, once shrouded in anonymity, had been held accountable for intimidation, harassment, and financial coercion. Legal restitution was finalized, $15,000 recovered, each dollar meticulously traced, cataloged, and returned. The courtroom, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now stood as the stage for deliberate, lawful reckoning. The members of the club offered apologies, each word measured, public, and unmistakably forced. Julia, fully exposed, could no longer rely on charm, subtle misdirection, or feigned innocence. Every smile, every whisper, every attempt at manipulation was now documented and powerless. The ledger, letters, receipts, and time-stamped photographs had transformed private deceit into public accountability. I walked the courtroom hallways with calm certainty. Each step echoed softly, carrying the weight of weeks of patience, strategy, and observation. The club members' eyes met mine fleetingly, hesitation, recognition, the faintest glimmer of regret. But I remained silent. Justice did not require theatrics or cruelty. It required meticulous preparation and unwavering resolve. Back home, I reviewed the final ledgers once more. Each page told a story of careful observation, lawful documentation, and measured response. The letters, photographs, bank slips, and surveillance logs were more than evidence. They were a chronicle of resilience and strategy, proof that meticulous planning and patience could neutralize deception without resorting to impulsive revenge. Friends and family remarked on the calm that had returned, noting the restored sense of security and routine. But I knew that the true restoration lay not in external validation, but in the knowledge that the foundation of our lives, our home, our finances, and our family, was secure. Every subtle threat, every act of coercion had been met with strategy, law, and unwavering attention to detail. Even in quiet moments, I revisited the lessons etched into the ledger. Each observation, every documented anomaly was a silent reminder that vigilance and lawful action are far more enduring than fleeting anger. I reflected on the patterns, the strategies, and the patience that had carried me through the ordeal, realizing that justice, when executed with care, resonates more powerfully than any act of immediate retaliation. Outside, the garden flourished under the summer sun. The tulips swayed in harmony with the wind, a living symbol of patience, resilience, and renewal. Every thorn that had once threatened our peace had been carefully uprooted and accounted for. The club members had learned, publicly and privately, that manipulation and intimidation carry consequences. I allowed myself a rare smile, knowing that measured justice had been served. The garden, the house, the ledger, and my family's restored sense of safety were all proof that patience, meticulous planning, and ethical action triumph over deceit and fear. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving in its wake not only restitution, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every action had been deliberate, measured, and effective. As the day faded into a warm summer evening, I stood among the tulips, reflecting on the endurance required to achieve justice. The lessons, carefully documented and internalized, would guide future actions and safeguard the boundaries I had restored. The experience had taught me that lawful, strategic patience, not impulsive retaliation, produces outcomes that endure, that secure safety, and that restore moral balance. July 2022. The garden had reclaimed its role as sanctuary, yet now it carried a deeper significance. Tulips swayed in the gentle summer breeze, sunlight scattering across their vibrant petals. My son ran freely through the flower beds, his laughter echoing against the walls of the house, oblivious to the tension that had once lingered there. The home, once a place of subtle dread, now breathed with calm, light, and quiet victory. I walked slowly among the blooms, brushing my fingers against the petals I had once feared might conceal a threatening note. Each flower now represented triumph, patience, and the meticulous work it had taken to reclaim not only my garden but my sense of security. The ledger rested on the garden table, open to its pages filled with evidence, letters, receipts, and photographs, a tangible chronicle of weeks spent observing, documenting, and lawfully preparing for exposure. Julia's absence brought a strange, silent relief. The gardening club disbanded. Members apologized publicly. Restitution had been recovered. The true victory, though, was not financial. It was the restoration of boundaries, safety, and control. Fear had transformed into calculated clarity. Every note, every anomaly, every manipulated transaction had been cataloged, neutralized, and transformed into a roadmap of lawful justice. I sat on the porch steps watching my son chase butterflies among the tulips, each burst of laughter a testament to resilience and protection. I felt the weight of what had been endured. The sleepless nights, the shadowed garden gates, the anxious observations, and recognized the transformation it had wrought in me. Patience, strategy, and lawful vigilance had replaced fear and helplessness. The ledger's pages, thick with notes and receipts, told more than a legal story. They documented the evolution of my awareness, the cultivation of restraint, and the triumph of methodical action over impulsive revenge. Each entry was a reflection of the moral and practical discipline required to reclaim what had been threatened. The notes and receipts were no longer instruments of anxiety, they were tools of empowerment. Evenings became moments of reflection. I walked through the pathways I had once patrolled cautiously, now observing the subtle movement of sunlight across petals, the gentle swaying of tulips, and the serene rhythm of my home. The lessons of manipulation, patience, and strategic action were etched into every corner. Each bloom whispered a reminder that resilience is born from observation, and justice is most enduring when measured, lawful, and deliberate. I allowed myself to smile, a rare, unburdened smile, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, gentle shadows across the garden. The garden, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary of clarity, peace, and reflection. I realized that justice and revenge are not synonymous. Revenge is fleeting, justice endures when guided by patience, documentation, and ethical action. I whispered softly, almost as a mantra, "You didn't lose me." you gave me away. The wind rustled through the tulips, distant birds called, and a sense of completion settled over the garden. Every thorn that had once threatened me had nurtured insight. Every deception endured had bloomed into clarity, and every careful, lawful action had restored balance. In the serene glow of evening, I understood that the garden was no longer just soil and flowers. It was a testament to resilience, vigilance, and the enduring power of measured, lawful justice. August 2022. The summer air had settled into a warm, steady rhythm, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers across Nashville. The house, once tense and shadowed by manipulation, now exhaled a cautious calm. Julia had tried calls, texts, even a tentative knock at the door, but I ignored them all. Silence had become a tool, a deliberate boundary, and a clear signal that some breaches of trust cannot be crossed without consequence. Friends and neighbors observed discreetly, offering quiet smiles and nods. They didn't need details to understand the transformation that had taken place. The calm in their eyes reflected the peace I had painstakingly restored. Each interaction was a gentle reminder that resilience, patience, and lawful strategy could reclaim life from deception. I hosted a small garden gathering for close friends, a modest assembly of tea, pastries, and soft laughter. The tulips swayed gently under the afternoon sun, their petals a kaleidoscope of color, carrying with them the story of endurance, strategy, and restored balance. Conversation flowed lightly, yet I kept the ledger close at hand, a silent sentinel. Every page, letter, photograph, and receipt had been carefully documented, not out of obsession, but to safeguard lessons learned and ensure history could not repeat itself. Observing the new faces at the gathering, I noticed the subtleties in human behavior, gestures, glances, comments that could hint at hidden motives. Experience had sharpened my awareness. Every interaction now carried more significance, every anomaly more weight. The past had taught me to read between the lines, to recognize patterns, and to respond not with impulsive anger, but with measured, lawful action. Even as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The home was safe, the family secure, and the garden a symbol of vigilance and renewal. The ledger, open nearby, was a testament to resilience, documenting every nuance of deceit, every act of intimidation, and every lawfully executed strategy to reclaim control. Subtle sounds of the evening, leaves rustling in the wind, distant footsteps, a soft bark from a neighbor's dog, reminded me that vigilance is an ongoing practice. The lessons were now deeply ingrained: observation, patience, ethical strategy, and lawful action. Silence, carefully applied, had proven more powerful than confrontation. By nightfall, the garden had settled into a tranquil rhythm. The tulips, the fading sunlight, the gentle hum of summer insects, all reinforced the quiet peace I had fought to restore. Each step, each act, each entry in the ledger was a silent guardian, ensuring that no future threat could unsettle the foundation we had reclaimed. The storm of deception had passed, but its lessons remained alive in every corner, every petal, and every careful observation I carried forward. As I watched my son play quietly among the flowers, a sense of completion settled over me. Vigilance had yielded safety, strategic patience had brought justice, and the silence I maintained was a quiet lesson to all who might test the boundaries I had restored. In that serene evening light, I understood that resilience is measured not by acts of retaliation, but by the foresight, discipline, and lawful persistence that prevent harm and reclaim peace. September 2022. The air had turned crisp, carrying the first whispers of fall across Nashville. The tulips I had once feared were now in full bloom, vibrant, resilient, and completely harmless. Life had returned to a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, yet every detail carried the weight of lessons learned. The storms of deception and intimidation were behind us, yet their echoes remained as subtle reminders of vigilance and patience. Irony revealed itself in a way I had not anticipated. Across the street, a new gardening club had formed, transparent in their intentions. Inviting in demeanor, they sought advice for soil preparation, bloom timing, and flower care. And unknowingly they came to me, the same man who had once endured manipulation and subtle threats, now stood as a quiet authority, a resource for knowledge and guidance. The very presence of my expertise, cultivated through the careful observation and documentation of weeks of deceit, was now sought without awareness of the past ordeal. I watched as they arranged tables, pots, and tools. Their energy was bright, curious, and genuine, a stark contrast to the shadowed motives of Julia and her club. A small smile crossed my face, subtle, unburdened. The irony was palpable, the lessons I had endured, the fear, the sleepless nights, the strategic planning had transformed not only my garden but also my understanding of control, patience, and justice. Every thorn that had once threatened me had now become fertilizer for insight and resilience. The ledger, thick with documentation, sat nearby on the garden table. Letters, receipts, photographs, and timestamped notes chronicled every deception, every calculated move, every subtle act of intimidation. Reviewing it quietly, I realized that the past would never repeat itself. Vigilance, careful observation, and lawful action had fortified me in ways beyond financial restitution or public exposure. It had cultivated wisdom. I allowed myself to stroll through the tulip beds, observing both my son's delighted play and the new gardener's earnest curiosity. Laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves and the gentle flutter of petals, creating a harmony I had longed for. Each flower seemed to whisper the story of patience rewarded, of careful planning paying off, and of the irony that those who had once sought to manipulate me were now distant echoes in a space filled with growth and transparency. The sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow across the garden. Shadows stretched long, blending with the vivid tulip colors, and I felt a profound calm settle over the scene. Every thorn that had once targeted me had nourished insight. Every challenge endured had become proof of endurance, and every calculated lawful action had restored balance not just to my home but to my sense of self. In that quiet evening, as the wind rustled leaves and distant birds called, I reflected on the ultimate lesson: deception can be exposed, manipulation can be neutralized, and patience and ethical strategy endure far beyond temporary fear. The irony was complete. Those who had once conspired against me had faded into the background, while life, growth, and honest curiosity had flourished around me. I whispered softly to myself, almost as a mantra, life has a way of returning what it owes, in full bloom. The garden, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary of resilience, wisdom, and ironic closure. Every thorn planted against me had transformed into nourishment for growth, every deceit endured into proof of perseverance, and every moment of vigilance into an enduring legacy of clarity and strength.